Okay, welcome to our 21st Century Agenda webinar series with the Academy. And we will be hearing from two sets of speakers today. So I would like to take just a moment to introduce the speakers that we have on the call, and then we'll hear more from our Academy partners as well. Presenting today on engaging fathers and co-parents together in home visiting and fatherhood services, we have Jenn Bellamy, the Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs and Professor at the University of Denver, Aaron Miller, Family Strengthening Director with the Colorado Department of Human Services, and Jill Jordan, Program Manager with the Colorado Department of Human Services as well, and then Christopher Clark, Father Program Administrator with the department. We also have a second presentation, Fathering Through the Pain, Healing the Wounded, with Dr. Waldo Johnson Jr., Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Chicago, and Dr. Clinton Boyd, today representing his role as Executive Director of Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities. And also on the call, we have Mary McKay, former board president for the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare, and current vice provost of interdisciplinary initiatives at Washington University in St. Louis. And then our academy staff as well. We have Nicholas Asher, Sanjam Dodd, project coordinators with the Academy, and Alex Maldonado as well, who will be helping us today. Liz Lightfoot is joining us as well. She is a board member with the Academy and professor of social policy at Arizona State University, and she'll be facilitating our Q&A. And I am Stephanie Anderson, and I'm the manager of the Clark Fox Policy Institute at Washington University in St. Louis, and a partner for today's webinar series. I think that's everybody. We've got a big group, but I'm going to hand it over to Alex now to talk a little bit about the research agenda.
Thank you, Stephanie. So, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on your time zone, wherever you're at. Hope your Thursday is treating you well. So, since May of 2019, a diverse group of researchers, DEI experts, people with lived experience with the child welfare system, and policy experts have worked together to identify research gaps to enhance the development of 21st century approach to a child and family well-being system. What began as a partnership between Casey Family Programs, the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and the William T. Grant Foundation has evolved into a wider coalition of academic, national, and philanthropic organizations, bolstered by extensive participation from individuals with life experience with child welfare. We believe that the new studies should address the most critical issues facing the field so that the research findings can be used to support innovative policy, practice, and changes in funding. Currently, the Research Agenda Coalition is encouraging federal, state, and local foundations to address the high priority research gaps, and we are actively promoting conversations in a few key topic areas. These topic areas include helping the research community see study participants as partners in research as part of prioritizing a commitment to social justice. We believe that stakeholder involvement will help researchers focus on the most critical issues, especially if this actively is funded adequately. Participation by community leaders and people with lived expertise in the development of research studies lays the groundwork for the type of collaborations required to conduct the research ethically and effectively. To that end, some cultural experts and people with lived expertise on our team have just produced a DEI tool to help enhance program planning and research study development. These collaborative research approaches can help ensure that the research meets the needs of not only the researchers, but the children, families, communities, and the provider organizations. So we're trying to improve how research is done while we help get more studies funded in the high priority areas. For more information, please see the 5-page initiative overview that was emailed to you. I can also drop it in the chat. I will also drop my contact information if you guys have any more questions or want to connect and find out more. And I will also put the website link that has our DEI tool as well and any other products that you guys would like. Thanks for investing your time and today with us, and a special thanks to our speakers.
Thanks so much, Alex. And Mary, did you want to say a little bit as well?
Well, let me just add my words of welcome and complete gratitude to our speakers today. Alex, also, you represent a set of 3 foundations that have invested in this partnership with the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare. And it's been a real privilege to be part of the steering committee that is focused on really addressing the research gaps that are outlined in the 21st century research agenda. What's really important is that we have incredible scholars here today and community partners that are going to talk about the way collaborative work can come, that coalitions and collaborators can come together to truly make a difference, and to close some of the gaps that we have needed to close for a long time. So I'm incredibly grateful to our panelists. The partnership with Clark Fox Policy Institute is amazing. Thank you so much, Nicholas and Sanjam, for really providing the organization behind this. And as always, Liz Lightfoot is a fellow board member, and she will do a terrific job with our question and answer. So I meant to welcome the people that are here live, and also this will be seen by many, many people on YouTube. You are all most welcome, and I will drop off now and turn it over to our speakers. Please enjoy the presentations.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenn Bellamy, Vice Provost for Faculty Affairs at the University of Denver and on faculty in the Graduate School of Social Work. I'm joined by my community partners from the state of Colorado, who are going to help me out in this presentation and jump in with their experience as well. So I'm going to go ahead and try and share my slides here. Hopefully this works smoothly. Okay, is everyone seeing my screen okay? Okay. So today I'm going to be talking with you about engaging fathers and co-parents together in home visiting and fatherhood services, and really highlighting the work of Dads Matter, which initially started as a home visiting intervention, but you'll hear its evolution over time, and in strong partnership with my Colorado state colleagues joining me today. But I want to first acknowledge that I'm representing the scholarship of many of my colleagues across different institutions. This truly has been a team effort between researchers and our community partners over time. And as you can see, we're spread across several different institutions, but the connecting ground here for all of us is that we were once all at the University of Chicago. So it's really fun today to get to present with my dear colleague, Dr. Waldo Johnson, as well as Clinton Boyd, as we all have that Chicago connection that brings us together, as well as our fatherhood work. So today what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of the background, the inspiration for the development of Dads Matter, as I said, first in home visiting, give you a sense of the motivation and the research that undergirds this intervention, as well as some findings from some studies that we did conduct in Chicago as a research team in partnership with several community organizations there. I'll look under the hood a little bit with you. We'll see what some of the key elements of this intervention are, and then talk about its evolution as part of an integrated intervention that we're testing out here in Colorado called the Nurturing Dads and Partners program. And then talk about some forward-thinking work around adaptation, dissemination, implementation, the further iteration of the legacy of this Dads Matter work. So you can get excited about the future with us. But rewinding several years back, and those of you who are familiar with evidence-supported interventions know that it is a marathon, not a sprint, the development of these interventions. So the Dads Matter team, we started working to develop this intervention back in 2010. And we chose home visiting as a platform for our father engagement work for several reasons, one of which was in the 2000s with McV funding, home visiting really grew quite a bit in the United States, where there were many programs that were expanding across the US into both urban and rural areas. At the same time, we had a very strong body of research around fathers and their importance in terms of a bevy of different outcomes for children and families, as well as a little bit of work that was really demonstrating that when fathers are engaged in child and family services, there's a potential for both bigger outcomes as well as outcomes being sustained over time. And we thought home visiting was really an important platform where there were some great outcomes being shown for child maltreatment prevention as well as school readiness. But the effect sizes were pretty modest and they sort of fizzled out over time. And our thinking was that engaging fathers to center them in home visiting services was a real potential area to boost outcomes in home visiting. But at this time, there wasn't a lot of data in terms of fathers' actual participation in home visiting, but anecdotally, we knew it was pretty small and pretty inconsistent. And even though the evidence-supported interventions of the time indicated that they were inclusive of fathers, really in practice and based on our research, we knew that that was pretty limited in nature. So we worked as a team to develop Dads Matter HV, beginning with a search of the literature to try to understand better the fathering influences that could promote or hinder child and family outcomes. And really, in the home visiting area, there was very little literature at this time. We had some more in some other cognate areas, which we certainly drew upon. And we were seeking in particular to identify evidence-supported strategies. And actually, it's fun to get introduced by Dr. McKay as we leaned on some of her engagement work actually to inform Dads Matter HV. But we also conducted some focus groups with fathers, mothers, and home visitors, including supervisors, to understand how they imagined fathers could be better included in home visiting services. And then we conducted some pilot tests of a blueprinted intervention with 2 home visiting programs in Chicago, Parents as Teachers and Early Head Start, to begin to see whether or not the intervention would improve outcomes in home visiting. And then later, based on the success of that pilot work, we were able to secure funding for a randomized controlled trial with 17 home visiting teams across Chicago that were using Parents as Teachers, Healthy Families, and Early Head Start, which are all evidence-supported home visiting interventions to provide a more rigorous test of our intervention. So that represents a lot of work over a good amount of time, but I'm thrilled to say that we had a lot of successful outcomes that I can share with you today. But before we get to that, I did want to quickly talk with you about study eligibility for this research. And I was recently actually presenting this work in Ohio, like literally yesterday at a fatherhood conference, and talking with them about these eligibility criteria, which were for the most part shaped off of program eligibility for the partners that we were working with in Chicago. So to participate in the pilot study and the randomized control trial, the fathers that participated needed to be the biological father and geographically accessible and potentially engageable in services. Moms and dads needed to be at least 15 years old. They needed to be beginning home visiting services, so at the initiation of those services, fluent in English or Spanish, free of any major mental illness or psychosis, and free of any prior or current child protective services involvement. And the children could either be prenatal or up to 2 years old. Sometimes people will ask, why not include more diverse fathers in our studies? And we actually had a lot of discussion about whether we should include stepfathers, other men who might be playing a fathering role in the family, and had a little bit of an argument, to be honest, in our research team, where some really felt it was important to focus in on a more narrow population to begin with, and then expand out from there with tailoring, and that's ultimately where we landed. And the piece where folks were not currently engaged in child protective services or had that prior involvement, that limitation was because the intervention is designed to be preventative in nature. But I'll share a little bit later that there is interest in potentially using some of these modules tailored to a child welfare platform. But this is so you understand the population with which the intervention has been tested so far, so that you know the population to which these results apply. So here is the really exciting part, right? So our team poured a lot of time and effort into this, and the team includes all of the families who participated with us in this research, as well as the home visitors and the other staff who make the program happen. So if we look at the results of both the pilot study and the randomized control trial in Chicago, we were able to demonstrate that when families received home visiting services enhanced with the Dad's Matter intervention, that was associated with increased father engagement in home visiting, improved mother-father relationship quality, and that was rated not just by fathers, but both mothers and fathers. Reduced stress for mothers and fathers, increased father involvement, and reduced risk for child maltreatment. And we were really thrilled about that reduced risk for child maltreatment outcome. If you're at all familiar with interventions designed to reduce child maltreatment risk, they're very limited in number, and that's a really difficult distal outcome to be able to demonstrate. So it was really thrilling to have these outcomes. So this is the part where I'd like to lift up the hood a little bit and tell you some more about what this Dad's Matter intervention looks like. So I indicated earlier that this is an intervention that layers into existing home visiting programs. And that was really important to us because the home visiting intervention world is quite diverse. There are a lot of different models out there, and depending on which state you're at, the region within which you're working, you can have quite a variety of different home visiting models. but they're wonderful and they do great things for families and have a lot of potential to support dads already. If you're not familiar with home visiting services, those are services delivered by either a paraprofessional or professional in the home and address things like safe surroundings for babies, safe place for them to sleep, developmental information to help parents understand how to support their child's development over time, referrals to other services, case management, a whole lot of services, and they begin typically in the prenatal period or right around the birth of the child and can be provided for 3 to 5 years of time. So the idea for Dads Matter was not replacing that good work, but rather complementing it to center fathers into home visiting services. And then Dads Matter is delivered in the first 3 to 6 months of standard services. So if we get in there and center fathers from the beginning, then dads can benefit from the intervention over the 3 to 5 years that they participate with their family. So that was an important piece for us. Another important piece was the modular design. So Dads Matter, unlike a lot of evidence-supported interventions, is modular in that you don't have to provide the elements in lockstep fashion. So when we train our home visitors to use Dads Matter, we also train them to assess the family, both father and mother, and their co-parenting relationship, so the home visitor can determine which of the modules fit best for the family. And this modular approach also allows the intervention to be folded into standard home visiting so that each element doesn't have to be provided at a particular time point. You can provide some modules, but not others based on the needs of the family. So that was an important innovation for us. Another one was that the content needed to be deliverable by paraprofessionals. As I mentioned, some home visiting programs are paraprofessionally driven, are delivered. Others require clinical degrees, such as nurse-family partnerships, where you've got to have a nurse delivering it, or it's not a nurse-family partnership. We wanted this intervention to be accessible and deliverable by professionals at a variety of levels. That flexible approach also allowed the intervention to be used with a variety of family structures and relationships. We do not assume that parents are in a romantic relationship. It's just that they are both parents of a child in common. And you'll see in the intervention have a lot of flexibility so that the intervention can be delivered to mom and dad together in a visit. But if it's not possible for them to participate together, there's tailoring built in so that the content could be delivered to moms and dads in a visit separately if needed to accommodate schedules, or maybe just because they're not able to get along well enough and to participate together. It also can be delivered in person, over the phone, or virtually. So it's highly flexible, which we found was really important, both for our families and for our home visitors. The idea is that Dads Matter is family-centered and father-inclusive from the start and ongoing. So what we found from our research was that home visitors, if they did include dads, tended to do so as sort of an add-on. So they would work with moms first and then try to bring fathers in. In this intervention, dads are centered in the family from the beginning and included throughout. And if for some reason there is something getting in the way of father's engagement in the program, another thing that we found was home visitors would tend to maybe assess a father's role in the family, determine that there was some risk that they were concerned about, and rather than working with the father to address any needs that they might assess, they would sort of just set them aside and say, well, this father maybe has mental health issues, or we're concerned about domestic violence, so we're just not going to work with them. Dads Matter trains home visitors rather to assess any concerns, address those with fathers if needed, and if they can't participate initially, to revisit their potential engagement over time. So we're not writing fathers off at the start of services and then not coming back to them, but rather continuously considering what their needs are over time. So the service goals of the interventions are, as I said, to assess the father's role in the family in ways that could be improved, managed, or enhanced. Engage service dads in services when it's appropriate in a supportive manner, and co-productively with the mom. And to build an effective co-parenting team between moms and dads in support of the child. And this intervention really, I do think of it at its heart as being a co-parenting intervention. So there is a lot of content around engaging fathers, but a lot of the modules you'll see at the center of the intervention are focused on co-parenting. And providing direct support to dads around managing stresses and challenges of being a father. So what that looks like is represented here in this visual model. So you'll see across the top, that's home visiting services as usual, conducted over time. And then you see Dads Matter is really provided right there at the start of services as families are enrolled. And the home visitor is trained to quickly assess fathers and mothers, as well as their co-parenting relationship together, determine if dads can participate in the intervention. And if they cannot, then that you stop with the Dads Matter intervention and provide any other services, if that's domestic violence, if that's mental health services, whatever the case may be. And then we reassess the capacity to engage fathers at a later time. So that's what that circle represents. Now, in our studies with over 200 families, we had very few fathers that were assessed as not being able to participate in home visiting services. So while our research with home visitors highlighted that a lot of home visitors had concerns about things like domestic violence, in practice, very few of the fathers in home visiting services actually had risks to the level that an assessment would indicate that home visiting was not appropriate for them. So most of the fathers are moving into services with mothers, and the initial modules are focused on engagement and assessment. So really bringing dads in an intentional way, preparing visitors to engage, and using assessment to then determine which of the co-parenting and individual support modules the home visitors will use in their work with the family. So the Dads Matter intervention is manualized. We do have a fidelity tool for it. It's got a lot of training and support around it, which I'm going to speak to here in a little bit, as it's very similar to the Nurturing Dads and Partners intervention that we're working with here in Colorado. So Colorado friends, I invite you to jump in here with me. So we've been working together. I know Jill and Aaron and I, maybe for going on 10 years, perhaps, working on a variety of different projects. But the Nurturing Dads and Partners program is part of the Colorado Fatherhood program. That's a Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood grant, where we've taken those Dads Matter modules that are focused on co-parenting and integrated them with an existing evidence-supported fatherhood program, Nurturing Fathers, which folks might be familiar with. So that grant was awarded to the Colorado Department of Human Services, and Aaron and Jill have been part of that team from the beginning, and then Chris joining us much more recently, but getting to see the exciting test of the outcomes of this new intervention. So the cool thing about Dads Matter, being modular, being flexible as it was, we saw the potential when we were applying for this grant for those co-parenting modules actually to come out and get paired up with nurturing fathers, which I think is a really interesting thing for us to think about in the fatherhood field. So we have big programs that have typically served moms and babies, where we could think about centering fathers, and that's really the Dads Matter HV work. But then we have a lot of fatherhood work going on, including here in Colorado, where fathers were saying that they were wanting to get support with co-parenting, but the models, including nurturing fathers, didn't really have a robust way of doing that. So Chris, Joel, any thoughts on sort of what brought the state into this, conversation, and sort of what you were hearing around fatherhood and co-parenting that inspired our partnership? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
Sure, I can kind of speak a little bit to that. I do think it is what you said, Jen, about like there's a lot of fatherhood programs that are separate and don't have that co-parenting piece. And then a lot of our programs and services are geared towards moms and their children. So it was a great opportunity to kind of integrate the two curriculums or programs. And we really thought that this would be something that would help improve or increase the opportunities for dads and moms or a support parent to work together to nurture their children and really enhance those relationships, right? Because we do know that they're struggling sometimes to get along just to raise the child, especially if they're not living together. So this was a great opportunity to do that.
Thanks, Jill. And on this slide, you can see that the Nurturing Dads and Partners program is the curriculum that we're using here in Colorado, but it's also, like home visiting, complemented by a lot of other supports like case management and financial support, and domestic violence information and other things that represent the program as a whole here in Colorado. So that idea of bringing together two evidence-supported interventions, one with a co-parenting piece and one with a fatherhood piece, it's like one of those things, it's an inspiring idea and we go for the grant and hooray, we got it, but now we got to do it. So the process of knitting together these two interventions, again, we're representing today the work of a much bigger team, but it was really great to bring intervention developers together with our state partners and other folks in our programs across Colorado to think through how this program would fit together. And you can see the 7 sites participating in the project with us here in Colorado, and testing it out. And now we're at the stage of getting to learn how well it's working, and we'll preview a little bit of that data for you. But what we found as we were doing this sort of pilot groundwork for the development of the Nurturing Dads and Partners program was that many fathers were interested in getting support on how to improve relationships with co-parents. We also knew that social support, including that from co-parents, could support father involvement, but there weren't very many interventions available to guide that, as well as little evidence on what the best strategies were. So those were all motivations for us. So in this project, the first phase was that work of collecting, again, qualitative data from fathers, from program providers, from the developers of the intervention, to work together to blueprint the intervention. Then we did a pilot study in phase 2 to see how well it worked, and we collected some data that helped us improve that intervention with that testing on the ground. And now in this current phase, we're doing a quasi-experimental study looking at both the implementation and the impact of NDAP on our outcomes. So again, lifting up the hood a little bit to look at where did we land? What does this intervention look like? So in this integration of Dads Matter, the co-parenting sessions that you saw as modules in the home visiting version are now being delivered to individual pairs of co-parents at 3 points in time, concurrently with dad's participation in nurturing fathers. So in that initial co-parenting session, the father navigator, that's the one who's delivering the services, meets individually with a father and their chosen co-parent. So one big learning from the pilot was that we needed to really expand our definition to co-parents, that it was not just romantically involved parents or biological parents. It was whoever the father selected as the co-parent to participate with him in the study. So that was a really important learning from the pilot phase. Similar to Dads Matter in the home visiting context, those co-parenting sessions can be jointly, separately, if needed, in person or virtually. They remain flexible. And then the nurturing fathers content is delivered as usual with just fathers in the peer group. So 12 sessions overall. So the Colorado Fatherhood Program evaluation team is at the Butler Institute, which is housed at the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work. Again, I get to represent the fun work of a lot of people today, but just to give you a little bit of sense of what we learned from the pilot study was that we were getting really strong engagement in programming. So one of the worries was that the fatherhood group sessions might get more engagement than the co-parenting sessions, but what we found is strong engagement of both, with a mean engagement level of 4.5 approximately for both types of sessions. So we collected some information about fathers' participation, about their in-session ratings, so how those sessions were happening. They rated them live, as well as filling out some surveys for them with us. Fathers were also really satisfied with the programming, both the fatherhood group sessions as well as the co-parenting sessions in the pilot study. The qualitative research, though, I think is some of the most compelling, where the results suggested improved relationships with co-parents, children, and others. So fathers were really expanding what they got from the program into other relationships, taking those co-parenting skills and generalizing them into other places. And fathers and co-parents would describe how they were better able to stay on the same page, especially through improved communication. So I had a couple of quotes here from fathers. They talked about learning new tools, everything that's helped in his relationship with his daughter. And the second one's about co-parenting. But we're definitely not friends, but we're having healthy conversations about our daughter because that's never going to change. And the co-parenting sessions really focus on that core shared desire for good outcomes for their kiddos. That's our daughter. It isn't her daughter. It isn't my daughter. That really reflects the spirit of those co-parenting sessions. So Chris, I might put you on the spot a little bit here, since you've been working directly with our father navigators and hearing about how things are going on the ground. Did you want to share a little bit to expand on what we're hearing about outcomes?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris with the Colorado Fatherhood Program. I think my first point is I can take that last quote there on the bottom right, that's really what our fatherhood navigators and advocates are focusing on. It's not about him versus her. It's not about mine versus yours. This is about our child. This is our daughter, our son. And that really, I know Jen's heard me say this before, but it really lets these parents level set and get on the ground level together that through effective communication and establishing these roles and having fluidity with this relationship, it's really going to have sustainability through your child's future. And that's really one of the factors that they focus on is, it's about the longevity of your child and how you can co-parent effectively together. And so that way it has the lasting success for your child. That's been the big one, but this that quote also kind of reflects with our father navigates too, is like when they have these cohorts, they also echo that not everybody out there is going to have that separation when it comes to mom and dad. When we work with child support and child welfare, we're able to facilitate that same conversation with these dads that child support isn't going to be a bad experience. It's not another government agency looking to come after you. They're really there to be another resource to support you. So that way, those protective factors as parenting, they can really just mesh together and produce a more productive outcome as far as co-parenting. And we've seen that with dads. They've had a lot of great feedback about it's not about me versus child support. It's another tool that I can get involved with that these funds are going to my child. Not only am I supporting my child through child support, but I'm also spending time with them and I'm having more time and more productivity with my child when it's my parenting visitation days. So they're taking that as a positive impact to have like a two-pronged approach to their fatherhood.
All right. Very quickly, because I think we're pretty much out of time. But just to give you a sense of the training and support that we provide to get workers able to do either of these interventions. We do a 1 full day of training in person or 2 half days virtually. And with the NDAP program now, actually, we have a fully virtual intro training that we do. And then we do consultation calls once a month to support with implementation while father navigators are using it or home visitors are using it. We're also tracking fidelity and doing booster trainings when needed to help people keep those skill levels up and the high quality delivery going. So last slide, I think, some of the adaptations and future work, thinking about Dads Matter. So you've seen Dads Matter in the home visiting context, paired up with fatherhood programming. I'm actually partnering with a psychiatrist at the University of Pittsburgh on a tailoring of Dads Matter HV specifically for Black fathers. Dr. Paula Poe's focusing now on the adaptation stage, collecting qualitative data for that adaptation. We're likely to start working on a Dads Matter prenatal or doula adaptation, which is super exciting to really think about those earliest stages, as well as improvements on the Nurturing Dads and Partners program that we're learning here in Colorado through our current study and thinking about what does the next iteration look like and how will we implement and disseminate over time. So lots of exciting work. Stay tuned for more to come. And thank you for letting us present our work today.
Good afternoon. I believe it is perhaps afternoon in most places now, but for those of you who are still enjoying the last bit of morning, good morning to you as well. I'm Waldo Johnson, and I am, again, very happy to be a part of this convening and discussion today. It's been particularly rewarding to listen to Jenn's update on the family visiting study that I recall she and her then Chicago colleagues began a few years ago, and they have made tremendous progress in this work. And even as I was listening to some of the findings, doing a great deal of figuring out the ways to enhance father involvement in these programs, which I would argue prior to them doing this work, it was at a fairly low level of engagement. So great to kind of follow what they're doing, and also great to be in this conversation with Dr. Clinton Board, who at one point was my student and now is my colleague, and that's a wonderful place to be in the academic world. The only thing I'd add to my introduction, I am serving as the Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Chicago, but in large measure, this work is centered on my role as a professor at the Crown Family School of Social Work Policy and Practice, where Jennifer and Neil and others have also served on the faculty. So this is a one opportunity for us. We're going to move forward with this in terms of starting out by talking a little bit about the background of our collaboration, to talk and to then dive right into this focus on toxic stress and trauma exposure among fathers. And we'll link that in some ways to what the research in these particular areas have to say about this. Thinking about the ways in which we're looking at this, there's a lot, I think a lot more has been explored with respect to the impact of toxic stress and trauma exposure with respect to children, far less so with respect to fathers. But when we think about this from a life course perspective, there isn't this real need to kind of segregate one from the other. It is perhaps the cumulative effects over time, and in many instances shape the readiness and preparation and the ways in which fatherhood is assumed by those who have experienced toxic stress and trauma exposure. And then we will talk a little bit about the sources of the trauma, the effects of the trauma. Clinton will provide some data by exploring the Fathers, Families, and Healthy Community program that he leads. And it's been very interesting. This is a long-standing program. It's been around in Chicago for perhaps 20 years or more. But when he came to the leadership, to the helm of this program, he sought to kind of reshape and think about this in a much more way of engaging fathers by, first of all, dealing with some of the issues that are barriers to their engagement, and particularly with respect to their physical and mental health well-being. And then following that, we'll talk more about trauma-informed systems of care, which is the approach that they're using in this program to work with fathers, share with you a bit about the various services that are offered to the fathers, and conclude with a little bit of discussion about policy and practice. The other thing I want to, say about my delight to share this space with Dr. Board, or if I may say Clinton, is that he is someone who, prior to his graduate studies, was working in fatherhood programs in the city of Chicago. So on one level, we might conclude that all things father start in Chicago. But he was doing that at the practitioner level before he returned back to school to pursue doctoral studies in sociology and then completing postdoctoral work at Duke University. So this is great. And one of the ways in which we can kind of think about the accomplishments that he's made to date. He's a young scholar, but someone who is making moves. He was just recently selected as one of the 2024 Aspen Institute Ascend Fellows. And if you're aware of that particular program, they have a very select number of fellows who are selected each year. And these individuals are focused on looking at various sectors of programs across the country. And so this award and this acknowledgement, I think, is a further example of the promise that he has as a leader, in this field. But I also think that this opportunity to be a part of this convening is really important in terms of an opportunity for more people to be aware about the kinds of work that, that he's engaged in. And so on the screen now, you can get a little sense of our history together, but also the ways in which he is equally abled as a researcher, as well as an administrator in a community-based fatherhood program that begins with fathers, but very similar to what Jenn and her colleagues are doing, are thinking about the engagement of families, more broadly. And then my own research work, being one of the co-PIs for what is now the Future of Families and Child Wellbeing Study, and having served as an evaluator for Parents and Children Together, which was ACF led father healthy marriage and father involvement program. So we'll go to the next slide now. Toxic stress and trauma exposure. So, when we think about this, one of the things that becomes really important for us to think about the degrees of stress is in many ways the chronicity that is very much central to kind of thinking about the degree to which stress moves from being positive stress to all the way over to toxic stress. And as I'm certain all of us at some point experience some level of stress, but in many instances, though it may be fleeting, maybe sometimes a little longer than we want it to extend, but often short term. We often are able to deploy the various mechanisms that are needed to adjust that, or maybe totally remove ourselves from that stressful situation, because the stress response mechanisms that we have allow for us to do so. But a part of thinking about this work is also thinking about the ways in which tolerable stress, which may in some instances be long-lasting, or, as pointed out here, a severe situation or event still is facilitated via the body. The body is able to do so. But much of what we want to focus on today is really about toxic stress and how toxic stress manifests itself, in the body. as a prolonged activation of the body's stress response. And as I referenced earlier, thinking about the chronicity, how chronic is it? And in our thinking, this response is often to frequent, intense situations or events without positive influences and relationships. Next slide, please. So, so with that, we want to talk a little bit about trauma and adverse childhood experiences, or what is often referenced as ACEs. Because even though, as I said earlier, the focus of our presentation is about fathers and how they manage, or how we can support them to manage toxic stress and traumatic experiences. When we began by thinking about this with respect to the ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences, that allows for us to have a broader context for kind of understanding this. It's quite likely that there can be fathers who may not be experiencing chronic adverse or toxic stress or traumatic experiences at the moment, but there's their inability in some ways to function as they might choose to, or we might expect them to do so, may be the result of earlier experiences, as far back as childhood. And so having this more life course perspective for thinking about these particular earlier adverse childhood experiences, and particularly in cases where they go either unnoticed or unaddressed, becomes really important in terms of helping us to kind of understand how they might impact parenting and the engagement of fathers. Perhaps they even as much as their readiness for thinking about becoming fathers. And once they become fathers, their ability to achieve even what they may feel is important for them to do as fathers. And so, with respect to the ACEs, we often kind of think about things such as witnessing violence, experiencing discrimination, various adverse neighborhood experiences, being bullied, living in foster care. These represent a wide range of ways in which traumatic experiences, can occur. And it's also possible, that these experiences may be happening in concert with one another. So people may have experiences of these, and they may be experiencing 2, 3, or 4. In fact, the way in which we've come to kind of understand the importance of looking at this through adverse childhood experiences is to think about the cumulative experiences with respect to adversity that children experience from 0 to 17. And so in the chart here, we outline when we think about abuse, we try to think about it across, the various dimensions of abuse: physical, emotional, and sexual. Whereas when we think about neglect, physical again, but then we think about emotional neglect and household, dysfunction. And if we had the time, we could go off and just kind of stay with this one chart and continue to kind of talk about this. Because, for example, thinking, when we think about parenthood, and we think about parenthood among adolescents who are not quite adults yet. So they really fall into this category of 0 to 17. And even if we think about some people who may be 18, 19, or 20, depending on the theory of adolescence that you choose to invoke, we can take adolescence all the way into the mid-20s, sometime late 20s. This situates them in a space that makes it even more difficult to kind of think about how then do we engage, because in response to these traumatic experiences. Next slide, please. So in terms of thinking about the effects of trauma, we attempted to chart out here trauma that could result in a variety of different things, all the way from actual physical experiences that are the result of trauma, to kind of thoughts and psychological concerns that one, might have, even the engagement in various destructive, behaviors. And so we began to kind of recognize that the effects of trauma can be widespread, and when we think about diagnoses, or at least trying to identify what those symptoms might look like, we began by thinking about, social isolation, mood swings, exhaustion and excessive tiredness, anger and rage, avoidance, confusion, and destruction of relationships. Again, such a wide range of things that are possible, such that even in the diagnosis, it's sometimes questionable as to whether or not we can accurately and completely do the diagnosis in one diagnostic setting. That in many instances that the kinds of engagement that Jenn and her colleagues talked about, they've been engaged with the fathers who were a part of the family visiting programs, become a great model to kind of think about this particular work also, because my own experiences, even as a researcher, helped me to understand very early on that developing the kind of relationships where people share the kind of information that you absolutely need to be able to help them is not something that comes very easily. I was involved in a research project where I thought I was having a great relationship with a couple of my subjects, only to, at some point later, they come back and tell me something that was totally opposite from what they told me months before. But it was at that moment they had come to trust me, even though I had assumed that at the moment when I trust them, that all the trust issues had gone away. And so thinking about the effects of trauma and what those symptoms might look like and the degree to which people might mask or fail to acknowledge those things, becomes important for thinking about how you engage. Next slide, please. So then thinking about the sources, so where is it that these fathers are experiencing various kinds of things that are resulting in their in their trauma? And so when we think about, for example, professional bias within child service systems, we might think about the gendered distinction in access to programs that serve parents, where in some instances there may be preferences or more comfort in working with mothers than there may be for fathers, but this bias results in something that actually affects fathers' ability to be able to be the kinds of fathers often that we might want them to be, but more importantly, the fathers that they may feel that they need to be, to their children. When we think about strained co-parenting relationships, I talked earlier about the ways in which even particularly adolescent relationships that result in parenting, can be this, but not only just kind of thinking about it from a life course perspective, but also thinking about economic issues that also strain the co-parenting relationships when parents are unable to deliver for their children the things that they feel that are basic. Also thinking about separation that might result as that might occur as a result of incarceration or divorce or separation on the part of the parents. But strained co-parent relationships can also occur as a result of mental health concerns and problems that exist, within one parent or the relationship between the two. Thinking about the ways in which, for example, a punitive and biased legal system affects and creates trauma. One of the things that has been much more so in our discourse has been this whole notion of trying to eradicate the bail system, because in instances where people are arrested and detained in jail awaiting trial, and particularly in Cook County where Chicago is located, this is a huge issue. Some studies have demonstrated that even by the time people actually come to trial, even if they're found guilty, they are released for time already served. So then we think about the ways in which families have been disrupted, even if there was some veracity to the charge, but in many instances where there was not, lives and family relationships are affected by that. Interpersonal violence, might be even considered from the standpoint of the perpetrator as well as the victim, within these interpersonal violence experiences. And then also thinking about historical trauma, which might be historical from a personal standpoint versus historical trauma within the family versus historical trauma within the community. They might be racial or ethnic experiences. All of these things, would contribute in uniquely different ways. And next slide. I'll just conclude this portion by kind of talking about paternal mental health impacts. And so we start by suggesting that fathers often express their depression, stress, and anxiety through a variety of ways. We talk here about self-medication and substance misuse, drinking, overeating, and stuff. But these are just perhaps a beginning list of the various ways in which these mental health, paternal mental health impacts present themselves in relationships, and how then those things, and particularly with respect to the last one referenced, withdrawal or disengagement manifests itself in terms of fathers pulling back from their involvement, with their children, with their families, because of their inability to be able to work through those particular issues. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Clint.
Thanks, Dr. Johnson. I really appreciate you, and I also just want to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the Academy for allowing me to join you all as a co-panelist to talk about the work that we're doing at Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities to empower the fathers within the community that we serve. And so just briefly, I'd like to talk to you all a bit about what our approach has been at FFHC under my tenure as executive director to really leverage data to drive decisions around program development. And so to start with, historically, as Dr. Johnson referenced, FFHC has been around for roughly 2 decades. And one of the things that I've long appreciated about the agency is that the founders always had this reliance on leveraging research to drive how we think about the programs that we wanted to develop, and making sure that that data is leveraged in a way where we can bridge the gap between theory and practice. And so me coming into the organization with my scholarly training and background, this was something that I felt not only needed to continue, but because of my unique skill set, I was uniquely equipped to carry this applied research framework into how we think about the programs we want to develop at Fathers, Families, and Healthy Communities. And so, again, just to provide a high-level overview of the fathers that we serve within our program, on average, we're talking about fathers who are 33 years of age. Overwhelming majority of our fathers identify as African American or Black. Many of them, unfortunately, have also been affected by the criminal legal system and the collateral consequences associated with it. And in many ways, our programmatic work is in direct response to a lot of the systemic challenges and barriers that our fathers confront on a daily basis. And one of our goals organizationally is to essentially improve the quality of life for the fathers that we serve. Which brings me into this point about the trauma experiences of our fathers. So again, when I took over for FFHC 3 years ago, anecdotally, one of the things I was picking up on is that many of our fathers had these very traumatic experiences, not only during their adult lives, but as I began to peel back the layers, I was able to link their adult trauma experiences to these adverse experiences they had during their childhood. But at the time in which I came into the organization, we didn't necessarily have a way for capturing detailed data or information on this topic. And so one of the things that I quickly decided to do with my program staff was to identify a trauma questionnaire that we could administer during the time of intake into the program, so we can start capturing very detailed and specific information from our fathers as it pertains to their experiences with trauma. And so to that point, after having an opportunity to analyze some of that data, what we learned is that on average, roughly 80% of our fathers stated that they've either seen someone seriously injured or killed. Roughly 70% of them had someone close to them die or was seriously sick or injured. Unfortunately, around 70% of our fathers have seen or handled dead bodies outside of a funeral, and roughly 60% of our fathers either fear for their life because they feel that they may be killed or seriously injured. And then lastly, just thinking about the fathers who have been in a serious accident at work or within or in a car. And so again, thinking about taking this data-driven approach to how we want to build out programming, I quickly pivoted after having an opportunity to review this data to focus on what does it mean for us organizationally to create a trauma-informed system of care that will allow us to more appropriately address the immediate trauma needs of our fathers, because it was also serving as a barrier to father engagement. And so for us, we went back and reviewed some of the research literature around trauma-informed systems of care and thought about ways in which we can incorporate this framework into our service delivery model. And so these are the 4 elements that we rely upon as we work with our fathers to address the various forms of trauma that they've experienced. So to start with, we prioritize making sure that the staff are appropriately trained on trauma awareness and response. So I think about it in terms of the 3 E's: empower, educate, and encourage. I want to empower my staff to better respond to and support fathers who have experienced trauma in our programs. I want to educate our staff on the importance of self-care and recognizing vicarious trauma and communicating to me about burnout, right? Because it's very important that my program staff is functioning as the best version of themselves, as I'm hoping that they will show up in the appropriate fashion with the fathers that we're working with in the community to uplift them, but I also need my staff to be uplifted in the process. And then again, just encouraging the staff to support the holistic growth of our fathers. In terms of facilitating healing and avoiding re-traumatization, we rely on rather the 6 principles of trauma-informed care. I won't go into the details associated with each principle, but what I will say is that the psychological and physical safety, the peer support, the collaboration and mutuality, the trust, the empowerment, choice, and voice, and the cultural, historical, and gender issues are all equally relevant in the context of the work that we're doing with our fathers. And I'm in the process of making sure that all of my staff, not just the program staff, but even the more administrative staff at FFHC, are well aware of these 6 principles and how it's incumbent upon us as staff within the organization that we're adhering to these principles as we engage with our fathers, because my hope is that our fathers will continue to view fathers, families, and healthy communities as an opportunity structure that will allow them to heal. In terms of implementing the key elements of our trauma-specific services, we focus on those formal screenings where we try to assess our fathers for anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and various mental health challenges they may be dealing with. And depending on how they score on those screenings, then we enact our referral process, because there's only so much we can do at FFHC. And so we have some trusted relationships with community partners who specialize in health and wellness services that we refer our fathers to. And then it's also important for us to think about creating these pathways for social and economic mobility for the fathers that we work with, because this is an important component of our work, especially if we're thinking about ways to reduce the various forms of trauma or avoid re-traumatization among our fathers. So we are we're very intentional about connecting our fathers to those emergency preparedness and response services, especially in the context of a lot of the climate change that is taking place today, and even thinking about it in the context of making sure the guys know the importance of CPR, right? Again, because so many of our guys are unfortunately in dealing with situations, life or death situations, and just knowing how to respond immediately in the event that they are confronted with something like that is very important. We also connect our fathers to job training, placement, and entrepreneurship training services. Many of our fathers also have challenges related to child support and child custody. So we offer pro bono legal aid services to our fathers as well. And then the last piece, but definitely not the least important, is providing the concrete supports, including monetary stipends to our fathers for their participation in our program, and which for many of our guys is something that they value tremendously, because many of them are struggling to get connected to the legal economy for various reasons. So the extent to which we can provide these concrete supports to them, it helps to provide some immediate relief financially for them, as well as emotional relief. One of the other things that I was very intentional about coming into FFHC is making sure that organizationally we partnered with the community violence intervention programs that are operating here within the city of Chicago. And so when you examine the core components of not only the local CVI programs here in Chicago, but think about it nationally, many of our CVI programs do not have an explicit focus on family strengthening and or father engagement. And in my view, father engagement and fatherhood programming should be treated as a public safety strategy. And so this provided me with the opportunity to think about how we integrate these fatherhood services into the context of a lot of the CVI programs that are operating here in Chicago. And to date, some of our partners have been Ready Chicago, Inglewood, and also Chicago Cred, which is former Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan's program. Then I know we're coming up on time, but we did want to spend just a little time just talking about some of the policy research and practice opportunities that we feel are essential to really advance the work that we're discussing and describing to you all right now. So thinking about some key areas where we could see funding, thinking about investing in these longitudinal studies where we can really think about have a better understanding of the nuanced role of fathers across different demographics, cultures, and family structures. And again, because we're talking about longitudinal studies, we'll be able to track these men over time and see how they not only evolve as fathers, but also think about the various ways in which their father experience has implications for the children, the families, and the communities that they're connected to. And then I think much more work can be done around evaluating the fatherhood programs that already exist within our communities, to identify what those effective practices are, which are promising practices, but if we evaluate them appropriately, then they can become those evidence-based practices that we can share with the broader field around how best to foster father engagement and father involvement. Practical applications, thinking about investing in pilot programs that seek to integrate, again, father engagement into existing services such as parenting classes and early childhood education. And then even thinking about those technology-based solutions. Since we live in a digital world, we might as well move more assertively in the direction of trying to leverage technology in the context of our work around father engagement. And then for policy advocacy, just thinking about ways in which we can investigate the impact of existing policies on father engagement and identify those gaps that need to be addressed in the context of this work. And also thinking about establishing those best practices, we should be thinking about collaborating with policymakers to create guidelines and recommendations that promote father involvement at the local, state, and national levels. And last but not least, this has to be a much more collaborative approach. So really thinking about what does it mean for us to engage our fathers in the context of this work, especially from a participatory action research standpoint, because we definitely want to ensure that the voices of our fathers are included throughout the process, not just at the beginning, but at the beginning, middle, and end, and making sure that they feel as if the program is very much responsive to their immediate and ever evolving needs. And so I will stop there. And I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Clinton, for that presentation and for being able to kind of quickly summarize that. I know we packed a lot into this session. I'm going to turn it over to Liz Lightfoot, who's going to moderate our Q&A today. We do have just a few minutes left. Hopefully we can answer a couple of questions. And then I will go ahead and put up a QR code as well while we get our discussion going that has a link to register for the additional series, the additional webinars in this series, as well as to access the recording for this session.
Great. Thank you, everybody. This was such two great presentations, and I can see the the Chicago, the Chicago probably is the center of parent engagement. So it was great to see how they, how the programs you are doing sort of relate to each other, but also how they differ. So we have a lot of questions, and I'm just going to have a chance to ask you a few of them since we don't have too much time left. But first I've got a question for both of the groups. And the first was sort of what we were just talking about at the very end, was about the participatory approaches and navigating community partnerships. So can you both talk in a little more detail about how you navigated building and continuing these relationships with your community partners, and particularly with community members when you're engaging in collaborative research methods?
I can start if that's okay. So the work here in Colorado, I'll focus on since I got my partners here and they can keep me honest. But I mean, I think it's really staying in conversation. You know, we're meeting together regularly and discussing every element of the work, you know, so whether that early on that was, what is this going to look like? How are we going to build this thing? How will we invite programs across Colorado to participate? Because we wanted it to be statewide. And we have rural partners. We have, you know, partners that are not maybe the easiest or typical choices because they're spread across the state and some smaller organizations. But I think the key has been frequent communication and to talk through everything. So at this stage, you know, we're talking through things like, okay, dissemination and what are our different audiences, not just for academic publishing, but how will we message back to the families and fathers that participated and the programs. So, and then thinking about, you know, what's next, like when this grant, and so that we keep talking about it. But I don't know, Chris, Jill, Aaron, anything you would add?
I would say that's a great summation of our approach. I would also add that we take a one-down approach from the state level of saying that the the individuals or the organizations providing our services are the experts in their community. So we don't go in and try to tell them that this is the way that you should engage fathers or come up with specific populations. We really let them come up with what they feel like works in their community, and I think that's been a big part of our success, is letting them kind of guide that practice and figure out who it is that they need the services in for their community.
I'll quickly jump in and say, in the context of our work, we really leverage the fact that for many of our fathers, fatherhood becomes a turning point or a motivational milestone for them to want to either transition out of the street life and give their children a life they've yet to enjoy. And so whenever we show up honestly offering fatherhood programming, there's always a level of eagerness and excitement among the men that we have an opportunity to engage, because this is the very first time for many of them they have an opportunity to connect with an organization or an institution that is taking a non-punitive approach to engaging them.
Right.
You know, we have a policy here at FFHC where it's no wrong doors. We really lean into the Brian Stevenson philosophy that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. And so we create a very safe and welcoming environment for our fathers. And once they feel the love, they tend to gravitate towards it. And what I will also say is that whenever we are assessing potential community partnerships, right, I'm very intentional about making sure that these are partnerships with agencies where we equally value our men and our fathers as assets to their children, families, and communities, opposed to thinking of them as liabilities. And so it's really, for me, thinking about this through a spiritual lens as well, because my discernment has to be on point. But once I sense that these are organizations that I mission-driven like FFHC to uplift the men and the fathers within our community, it makes it a lot easier for me to think about ways in which we can collaborate with one another to ensure that our fathers are being uplifted in the appropriate fashion.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm very sad to see that we're already at the end of our time, and we had a lot of questions in the chat. We also had, I have questions myself, including both more details about the different projects and programs and how successful the participation is and all of that, as well as research questions by how you measured certain things. I have questions also about how you would do this longitudinally when you brought that up. I think that really, that was what I was curious about. But I'd suggest folks, if they have questions, that I'm sure our panelists would be happy to have you reach out to them. And they can look also at the questions that were given as well. And I want to thank everybody so much for their participation today. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody a lot, and we'll turn it back over to, who am I turning it back over to? Stephanie?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We will share the questions in the chat with our panelists and hopefully be able to share out some answers to those after the session. And we will also see if we can share slides. So we will be sending out some follow-up communications if you registered for the webinar. So thank you all for being here. You can find this recording on our YouTube channel and on Open Classroom's website later on today or tomorrow. And we appreciate all of you being here, and we hope you'll join us for the additional webinars in the remainder of our 21st Century Agenda series.